In a quiet corner of the world, nestled among vast forests and jagged mountain ranges, there stood an ancient village known as Kethar. The village, abandoned by time, had few inhabitants left, and its streets were often silent, save for the occasional rustling of the wind through the trees. But there was one thing that remained, untouched by the passage of time: the Mirror of Kethar, a cursed relic believed to possess unimaginable power. Legend told of the mirror's origins. Created by a long-lost civilization, it was said to be a gateway to another world. Those who gazed into its depths saw not only their reflection, but glimpses of their deepest desires and fears. The mirror had been locked away for centuries, its power feared by the villagers. But when Eleanor Briggs, a curious and daring historian, heard of its existence, she couldn't resist the call to uncover the truth. Eleanor arrived in Kethar on a foggy afternoon, her heart pounding with excitement. The air was thick with mystery, and the village seemed to whisper secrets as she walked along its abandoned streets. She had come to study ancient artifacts, but it was the mirror that intrigued her the most. No one had seen it for years, but the rumors were undeniable. It was hidden somewhere within the old church at the edge of town. As she approached the church, she couldn't help but notice how still the air had become. The once ruined structure stood tall against the mist, its stone walls weathered by time, but still imposing. Eleanor pushed open the heavy wooden doors and entered, the sound of her footsteps echoing through the hollow interior. The inside of the church was as cold as the grave, and the air was thick with the scent of mildew. Dust covered the pews, and the once gleaming stained glass windows now sat dull and cracked. But at the far end of the church, tucked in the shadows, stood an altar. And on that altar, covered with a thin cloth, was the mirror. Eleanor approached it cautiously, her breath quickening with anticipation. The mirror was large, its frame ornate, and intricately carved with symbols she didn't recognize. The surface of the glass shimmered slightly, as though it were alive. She reached out and carefully removed the cloth, revealing the mirror in full. As her fingers brushed against the frame, a cold shiver ran down her spine. The air around her seemed to change, as though the world had shifted slightly. For a moment, she stood in awe, staring at the reflection of the church in the mirror, until she realized something was wrong. The reflection was not the same as the real world. In the mirror, the church appeared grander, its walls taller, its stained glass glowing with vibrant colors. But more disturbing was the figure that appeared in the reflection, a shadowy silhouette standing near the altar, gazing directly at her. Her heart raced. She spun around, but the church was empty. No one stood there. When she turned back to the mirror, the figure was gone, leaving only the reflection of the abandoned church. Eleanor could feel the pull of the mirror. Something inside her whispered that this was just the beginning, that the mirror was offering more than just a glimpse into the past. It was showing a world beyond the one she knew. A world of possibilities, of dreams, of horrors. Unable to resist, Eleanor leaned closer to the glass. As she did, the air grew heavier, and the room seemed to grow darker. A low hum began to vibrate from the mirror, its surface rippling like water disturbed by an unseen force. Then, without warning, the reflection of the church began to twist. The walls bent and warped, the colors of the stained glass bleeding into one another. Eleanor gasped as she saw a door in the reflection, a door that didn't exist in the real church. It was as if the mirror was offering her a way out, a passage into the unknown. Without thinking, she reached forward and touched the surface of the mirror. The moment her fingers made contact, a shock ran through her body. The world around her seemed to collapse, and she was plunged into darkness. When she opened her eyes again, the world was different. She was no longer in the church. She stood in a vast, unfamiliar landscape, a place that seemed both familiar and foreign. The air was thick with fog, and the ground was covered in a soft, white mist. The sky above was an unnatural shade of violet, and in the distance, she saw the faint outline of an enormous structure. Her heart pounded in her chest. She had crossed over into the mirror's world, a world where reality no longer held sway. It was both beautiful and terrifying. As Eleanor wandered through the misty landscape, she could feel the presence of something or someone watching her. The air was cold and the silence was suffocating. Each step she took seemed to echo in the stillness, and yet she never heard her own footsteps. It was as though the world itself was holding its breath, waiting. Eventually, she came upon a figure standing in the distance. It was tall, cloaked in shadow, and its face was hidden beneath a hood. The figure stood motionless, staring out into the fog, as though it had been waiting for her. Eleanor hesitated, but then took a cautious step forward. The figure did not move. As she drew closer, she could make out the faint glow of its eyes beneath the hood, eyes that seemed to pierce the fog like twin lanterns. "You have crossed the threshold," the figure spoke, its voice a deep, resonant echo. "You are no longer bound by the rules of your world." Eleanor swallowed hard. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice trembling despite her efforts to remain calm. The figure turned slowly, revealing a face that was both human and otherworldly. It was a face of a person who had lived for centuries, its features sharp and angular, with skin that seemed to shimmer like the surface of water. "I am the Watcher, the guardian of the Mirror's world," the figure explained. "And now you are part of it." The words sent a chill through Eleanor's spine. She had no idea what she had unleashed by touching the mirror, but she knew she couldn't turn back. She was trapped in this strange, unsettling world, and the only way forward was deeper into its mysteries. The Watcher didn't explain much further, but Eleanor could sense that he was neither friend nor foe. He was simply an observer, a creature bound to this world, like the mirror itself. As he turned and began walking, Eleanor had no choice but to follow. The path they took led through a dense forest, its trees towering above them, their twisted branches reaching out like the fingers of ghosts. The further they traveled, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. The fog thickened, and the silence deepened, as if the world was holding its breath. "I have to find a way back," Eleanor whispered to herself, though she wasn't sure if anyone could hear her. "I have to." The Watcher paused and glanced back at her. "There is no way back unless you find the truth," he said cryptically. "The mirror holds the key, but the cost of using it is greater than you could ever imagine." As Eleanor continued to walk, she could feel the weight of his words pressing on her chest. The truth. What was it? And what was the cost of finding it? The forest seemed to stretch on forever, with no end in sight. But Eleanor knew that she had no choice but to press forward, to uncover the secrets of the mirror and the world it had brought her to. The fog grew denser as they walked, the forest around them increasingly unfamiliar. The trees were unlike any Eleanor had seen before, their bark dark and twisted, with symbols carved into their trunks, ancient markings that seemed to pulse with a faint, eerie glow. As they moved deeper into the forest, the air became thick with the scent of something old, something forgotten. It was as if time itself had been suspended in this place. The Watcher led her through the dense woods, his pace unwavering. His glowing eyes remained fixed on the path ahead, and despite the oppressive silence, Eleanor felt as though he knew exactly where he was going. She, on the other hand, was lost in this strange world, each step taking her farther from the world she once knew. Eventually, the trees parted, revealing a clearing. In the center stood an enormous stone structure, a temple of sorts, its architecture unlike anything she had ever seen. The walls were covered in intricate carvings, and at the top of the structure, a large stone door loomed, its surface etched with more of the same symbols she had seen on the trees. "This is where the truth lies," the Watcher said, his voice low and distant. The mirror was never just an object. It was a door, a portal to the unknown. Only those who dare face the truth can unlock its power. Eleanor felt a shiver run down her spine. The air around her seemed to hum with energy, and the door before her seemed to beckon her forward, as though it knew she was the one who had come to seek the answers. Taking a deep breath, Eleanor stepped forward, her heart pounding in her chest. The Watcher remained silent, standing back as if to give her space. She reached out and placed her hand on the stone door. Instantly, the ground trembled, and the carvings began to glow brighter, their light intensifying until it was almost blinding. The door slowly creaked open, revealing a vast chamber inside, filled with swirling, iridescent lights. The air was thick with energy, and as Eleanor stepped inside, she felt the very fabric of reality begin to unravel around her. The walls of the chamber seemed to stretch and distort, creating an endless tunnel that spiraled down into darkness. As she descended further into the chamber, Eleanor could feel her mind swirling. The lights around her pulsed, pulling her deeper into the unknown. She could hear voices now, faint whispers carried by the wind. They were familiar yet distant, and she couldn't make out their meaning. But the closer she got to the heart of the chamber, the clearer they became. "Evelyn," a voice whispered, "do you know what you've unleashed?" It was her name, the name she had long forgotten. But it wasn't her speaking. It was a voice from the past, one she couldn't place. The deeper she descended, the more the whispers became louder, more urgent. They were not just voices, they were echoes of those who had come before her, the souls trapped by the power of the mirror. At last, she reached the center of the chamber, where a large pedestal stood, its surface gleaming in the iridescent light. Resting upon it was the mirror, the one she had first discovered in the church. But this version was different. Its surface rippled like water, and inside, she saw visions of herself, of her past, her future, and her deepest desires. "Come closer," a voice beckoned, but it was not the watcher's voice. It was a whisper that seemed to come from the mirror itself. "The truth awaits." Eleanor stepped forward, her heart racing. As she gazed into the mirror, she saw not just her reflection, but a series of visions, glimpses of her own future, of the choices she had made and those that lay ahead. The mirror was not simply a portal, it was a window into her soul. But as she looked deeper, the visions began to shift. She saw a dark figure, another version of herself, one that had made different choices, one that had embraced the power of the mirror and unleashed chaos. The figure in the mirror smiled at her, its eyes glowing with the same golden light that the phantom had. "No," Eleanor whispered, realizing the terrible truth. The mirror had shown her not just the path of freedom, but the path of destruction. The curse she had sought to break was not merely bound to the phantom, it was a curse that ran deep within her own soul. As the vision in the mirror faded, Eleanor stumbled back, her mind racing. The truth was more than she could bear. She had come to break the curse, but now she saw that the curse was part of her, part of the very fabric of her being. The mirror had shown her the potential for both salvation and damnation. The watcher appeared beside her, his figure emerging from the shadows, his eyes filled with sorrow. "You see now," he said softly. "The mirror reveals the choices we are destined to make. It is not the object itself that holds power, but the person who gazes into it." Eleanor turned to face him, her heart heavy with realization. "What am I supposed to do now? How do I undo this?" she asked, her voice trembling with uncertainty. "You must face yourself," the watcher replied. "The mirror does not show the truth of the world, but the truth of your heart. Only by confronting your deepest fears, your darkest desires, can you truly break the curse." Eleanor felt her resolve strengthen. She had come this far, and she would not turn back now. She knew that to escape this world, she would have to confront not just the phantom, but the darkness within herself. She turned back to the mirror, and this time, she looked not just at the reflection, but at the figure standing beside her in the glass. The figure smiled, and for the first time Eleanor understood. The choice had always been hers, freedom or destruction. And now she had to make it. With newfound resolve, Eleanor turned away from the mirror. The watcher watched her closely, as though awaiting her decision. She walked toward the door, but before she could leave, the phantom's voice echoed through the chamber, loud and clear. "You cannot escape, Eleanor. You're already mine." The words sent a shiver down her spine, but she didn't falter. She knew what she had to do. The curse had not only bound the phantom, it had bound her as well. But it was time to break free, to sever the tie between herself and the ancient evil that had consumed them both. With a single step, Eleanor stepped through the door, leaving the chamber and the mirror behind. She could feel the weight of the world lift from her shoulders, as though a great burden had been released. But even as she walked away, the phantom's presence remained, an indelible mark on her soul. The world around her seemed to shimmer, the boundaries between the real world and the mirror's realm blurring. The curse had been broken, but at what cost? Eleanor awoke in her own bed, the familiar surroundings of her room offering no solace. It was as though everything had returned to normal, yet she felt changed. The memories of the mirror, the phantom, and the cursed world haunted her. She knew that the world she had returned to was not the same as it once had been. The mirror had shown her the darkest parts of herself, and now she had to live with the knowledge of what she had seen. But the curse was broken. The phantom was no longer a prisoner, nor was she. For the first time in years, the world felt vast again, full of possibilities. But as she looked out the window, her eyes caught the faintest reflection in the glass, a shadow, a glimpse of the past. It was the phantom, standing behind her, watching. His golden eyes glowed faintly, but he was gone before she could turn around. The curse may have been broken, but the legacy of the mirror, the legacy of Blackwood Manor, would live on. And though she had escaped, she could never fully leave behind the darkness that had claimed her soul.